Well, welcome to this webinar presented by the IET's Anglian Coastal Local Network, which represents members in Norfolk and Suffolk. Welcome also to folks from other parts of the UK and indeed globally. I'm really delighted to welcome you all. I'm Kevin Foster. I'm chairman of the Anglian Coastal IET Local Network, and I'll be your host for this evening. Now, we'll leave questions until the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, and that's Clayton Nash. Clayton is Strategy Director at Cityfibre, and he's a highly experienced telecommunication professional who has been with Cityfibre for 5 years, leading their product development and latterly as their Strategy Director. Prior to that, Clayton has held senior technical and product roles with Vodafone, Network Rail, Openreach, and the cloud. Clayton holds a degree in computer science from the University of Witwatersrand. Today, Clayton will talk about the work Cityfibre is doing to deploy future-proof full fibre to provide gigabit connectivity to up to 8 million UK premises by 2025. So Clayton, over to you.
So today we're going to have a conversation about what Cityfibre is doing to transform the UK. We're about 10 years old now. My daughter's 9, so Cityfibre is a little older than her. And we were set up back in 2011 in the old days. And the task at the time was to build a brand new digital infrastructure platform to the UK, change the status quo, disrupt the UK market in a positive way, and spark change for the nation. Now, I think you could probably get a list of 150 companies with a similar mission that started out in the last decade. They say that economists have successfully predicted 83 of the last 3 recessions. Similarly, there have been any number of companies that have sat down and said, let's disrupt the UK telecoms infrastructure. I think the big difference is we're actually in the process of doing that. We're taking the world's 5th largest economy and dragging it into the future. When we started out, I think many people could refer to us as an altnet. We're no longer there. We're now essentially the 3rd largest telecoms network in the country. We're delivering gigabit services to more than 40 different cities live at the moment. And we're in the process of transforming the economy and moving forward. And we're doing that because we believe in a few simple things. We're going to do three things. One, we're going to deploy a next generation future-proof digital infrastructure for the UK. In essence, we're going to build to 8 million homes and then about 800,000 businesses in many other locations in a third or more of the country. We're going to use that to transform the digital capability for the nation's citizens and businesses. We've all sat in the last year through a process with COVID, where these networks have become more and more essential. And this transformation has happened probably much faster than any of us expected. But there's still more work to do, and we're going to underpin all of that. And with that transformation, we expect to spark innovation, which underpins the economy in the digital age. We're living in the future now, and we need a network that supports us. So how do we think about what we do now and how that lives for the next 50 to 100 years? How do you think about generational change in a network? The way we do that really is with what we call the well-planned network. When we sit down to think about building, we don't start out to go, we're trying to build a fibre to the home network, what does that look like? We very explicitly, very deliberately say, how do I connect every single location in this city to a network that's going to be full fibre and purpose-built and ubiquitous and high capacity, everything. So it's the Tommy Lee Jones approach of every doghouse, outhouse, hen house. But in our case, that's every home, every business, every mobile cell site, every public sector site, every traffic light, every park bench, every electric car charging point. And we throw ungodly amounts of fibre at this problem. You can see in the corner here, our network in Edinburgh, which we built back in the mid 2010s, how that's expanded and how we're driving fibre into every single point in the network, because we want to deliver this to all applications throughout. The thing though is, we're not trying to just deliver a super fast service. Over the past few years, as the copper network has been dragged kicking and screaming into a broadband age, the conversation has been fundamentally about megabits. How many megabits do you have? Do you buy the 40 or the 80 megabit package? As we start thinking about GFast, will we be able to get 100 megs? As if speed was the only consideration. Now, speed's super important through the process. There is a tangible difference between a Ferrari and a Ford Mondeo in terms of speed. But there are also many, many other things that go along with being Ferrari that help make that an experience that's transformational. And for us, that's a whole series of things. That's us not just delivering a network with incredibly low latency and ready for 5G, but it's delivering a network that answers the question, how would you build a telco for the next 100 years if you were starting from scratch? For us, that really means, one, the network is great, the fiber is excellent, we're delivering symmetric services. So, why would you deliver asymmetric services if you're going to go into the future? But it also means that the network runs largely without faults, right? Our network is essentially immune to weather. This is just a consequence of using glass. It's a wonderful medium for delivering services. We had an ISP who was doing a set of integration testing with a fiber prem service. And after a few months of trying it out, they said the only problem they had through the process was they hadn't had a single fault and hadn't been able to test the trouble to repair process. That's a pretty amazing statement. A network that ran for 3 months without a single fault, built from scratch. In addition to that, we also think about how you make a network that's the most adaptable possible. So the network is not only built out of glass, it's also built out of fiber. It's software defined at the access layer at every point. And that means we can cut and chop and change the whole thing as much as we want. It can be simple, it can be complex, it can all be done remotely and with zero touch from us. So, it's really important to us that if you sat down and ordered a service, the network should deliver that service, even if someone had to turn up and dig in your garden without any human intervention. And we have that today. If you jump onto Vodafone or TalkTalk's website or Zen or any of the other 17 ISPs who sell services through our network, you can find out whether your house is connected to the network. You can select an appointment time. Someone will turn up, they'll connect you, they'll make sure if anything blows up, they'll alter the service on the fly, they'll do a speed test and they'll walk away. And through that whole process, no Cityfibre person needs to be involved. Obviously, we have a set of people in the NOC who monitor things and make sure everything runs well. But in theory, zero touch delivery from the start. And then there are other considerations, things like running the network in the lowest possible carbon way, using exchanges that were custom built, unique, small, and focused on what we're doing. And all of that is important because the network provides more than just a chance for the UK to catch up in terms of what it's doing. The past year, as we've exited the EU and run through COVID, there have been points when perhaps you didn't think the country was doing as well as it should have been doing. And whatever you think of the decisions that were made, we now have a situation to deal with. And part of that is going to be catching up on the network side of things, making sure that everybody in the country is connected, new standards for service and reliability. So when we're sitting at home and we need the network, it's there all the time. Changing the consumer landscape so that new consumer ISPs are able to enter the market. For a long time, we've had 4 or 5 people who dominate that you could buy from. There are a number of other smaller players who kind of essentially operated at the edges of that network, try to differentiate themselves in various ways. This new network offers the opportunity for real competition to re-enter the consumer ISP space. We're really proud of how we're making that happen. We'll talk a little bit later about who's helping us do that. The other thing it does is it supercharges our economy. That's pretty important when we shut the economy down for the best part of a year. We think that based on some work the Fibre to the Home Council did, this network is worth 1 to 2% of GDP growth if we get it out to everybody. And it's there to enable the next generation of people, right? The children who've been at home all this time, they've grown up on these networks and they know what they need. And it's not just innovation in kind of broadband. We want to essentially redefine lifestyles, of the towns and cities that we operate in. That runs from smart traffic control. Today, traffic lights are kind of interesting and they run on timers. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of sitting in a traffic light with no traffic at all, waiting pointlessly. Wouldn't it be really nice if those traffic lights were aware and understood what was going on and could respond in real time to issues that are going on? Healthcare innovation, we connect a number of hospitals in Glasgow. That was ever more important more recently. But even more than that, if you've had to contact a doctor through the last year and you were unable to go into the office, it suddenly turned out that in many cases it was better to be on a Zoom call with a doctor. There was no waiting time. The appointments happened much quicker. You got the help you needed. And we were able to innovate healthcare when we had to. And it turned out to be really good. Wouldn't it be great if we could do more of that? We have long waiting lists. We have many backlogs that we need to think about. And the network is going to be important in driving that forward. Then there's making our cities safer. We provide any number of connections to super high definition CCTV cameras across the UK. That helps just keep places safer. It helps monitor traffic. It helps in any number of ways. Once you can see into your city, once it becomes transparent through the network, it's much easier to make sure the right things are happening. And lastly, we're enabling IoT and AI-enabled innovation and the 5G process that's happening. The spectrum auctions are almost done for this. The networks are being built. And for the first time, you can't do it with Ethernet, right? Glass is the only way to drive the volumes of traffic that we want. And we're helping make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about how we enable that and why our new owners thought that we were the right entity to move forward with and trust the future of the UK to. So back in 2018, which feels like forever ago now, two companies, Antan and a division of Goldman Sachs called West Street Infrastructure Partners, paid a little over £500 million to pull us off AIM, take us private. At the time, they bought into the vision that we were sharing, that we needed to have these ubiquitous fiber networks everywhere. And the really great thing is that the way that these infrastructure entities are set up lines up perfectly with the way that we want to think about the network of the future. It's really difficult as we replace the network. Now, we have to remember, this is the first network we've built for 40 years since the cable network back in the 80s. And prior to that, the copper network came into being in the 1800s. This network is going to last for generations. And you can't build a generational network if you're thinking about the next quarter's results. You can't worry about paying dividends when every pound of network you put in the ground comes back to you 3, 4, 5 times if you just wait and are patient. And with Antan and West Street, we have some partners who really, really buy into that vision. I'll talk a little bit about how they're helping us finance this, how they're helping us link up to all the right partners. But what they have done is they've allowed us to think about the next 50 years. And that's what we're doing. We're changing things over the course of multiple generations. And they've taken a long view of all of that and supported our view of how the UK is going to change. So how did that happen? Back in 2011, step back about a decade, we were nobody. We were founded for about 3 years. We were a small, interesting little fiber operator in a few towns around the country. We made a lot of noise, but I don't think anybody thought that we were going to change the world in any way. In around 2014, we jumped onto AIM, and we spent a few years on AIM, raising some money, expanding the network up here and there, and in essence being, again, having great vision, but no real way to execute that. That really started to change about 5 years ago, 2016. KCOM, a venerable name in networking, was finding that it really had no way to kind of monetize the assets it had in the ground. And it sought to walk away from most of the UK, kind of pull itself back into Hull, where it understood where things were. And we took on those assets from them. And this is a critical change for us. It vaulted us from a few towns and cities to more than 21 metro locations, where we had fiber deep into the communities. We bought a few other networks along the way as well. And it was really this process which kickstarted a series of the public sector networks and a whole series of the business services that we had. We were able to actually say, we've got network in 21 cities. We can deliver you kind of gigabit services through all of those processes. And things started to hum. We bought a company called Internet in 2017. Those of you who are steeped in UK network history know that this is a 30-year-old company. It's one of the original kind of founding entities. And it had built a massively excellent channel, a great sales process. And it was trying to figure out how it differentiated itself on a network basis. And we felt that putting the two entities together created a proper telco, an infrastructure layer, a wholesale layer, and a go-to-market, both through a channel and through a series of direct wholesale relationships. And then the really big change that happened in 2018. Vodafone, at one point the largest telecoms company in the world, now perhaps a little smaller, sat down with us, and we together agreed to change the way that people in the UK connected their homes to the internet. A £500 million strategic partnership with them. They underpinned a 1 million home rollout. And this is really what kickstarted Anton and West Street Infrastructure Partners to say, this is a serious network. They were looking for an opportunity. They'd seen how all of this had played out in France and in Spain, in Portugal, and in Amsterdam. And they understood that somebody was going to transform the UK. They just didn't know who. And it became very apparent to them that it was going to be us. They took us private, and very rapidly we raised more than £1.1 billion to underpin the network rollout. At the time, that was the largest fiber infrastructure financing in UK history, right? And let's think back to the halcyon days of late 2018. We were in the midst of Brexit, lots of uncertainty. No one quite knew what was happening. This was a massive vote of confidence from two global players who understood infrastructure. Through early 2020, back when we were allowed to do things like go to lawyers' offices and hold celebration parties, we took the second major step. We brought onto the network TalkTalk. I don't think I need to tell you how big an ISP they are. And we bought the assets of their subsidiary Fibre Nation and brought them in-house. At the same time, we did that deal with Three, where we helped them deliver dark fiber to their cell sites. Everywhere we have fiber, Three will connect their cell sites through us. And the reason that's a massive change is Three has completely forgotten now about bandwidth costs because it's infinite. We've enabled them to completely ignore the issue of bandwidth and move forward. So the challenge we had now was we had a lot of money. We had a huge ambition. We'd announced a 5 million home rollout, and we needed to build a machine to build the network. And we did that by partnering with a company called Bechtel, massive project management organization that's built insanely important things through that process. Kicked off a 10,000 job recruitment process to kind of enable the industry. And we've landed in 2021 with a whole series of consumer ISPs, people buying gigabit services. You're all in Ipswich, many of you are in Ipswich. You'll be aware that through the door, Zen Internet is now delivering gigabit services to Ipswich for £40 a month over this network. And we increased our ambition from the 5 million to our recently announced 8 million home plan. And we've become a truly kind of UK-wide entity now. We have offices, we're based in London because we like living in Covent Garden. There are great restaurants around there, but we build across the country. We have a whole series of build offices, commercial offices, regional offices everywhere. So what is it that we do fundamentally? Our goal is to build a series of really simple infrastructure products. Our ideal endpoint is we sell dark fiber and a set of layer 2 Ethernet services, plus some co-location and very little else. The reason we need to be simple is that we're doing something very complicated with a lot of moving parts. And we're trying to do that in a lot of places. And if we spend most of our time worrying about optimizing 50 different products to extract money from people, we're going to miss the big goal, which is to roll the network out. We have internet there. It's still taking those input products and turning them into more complex things in its space. But what we are doing is delivering all of these simple products through a whole series of verticals in a wholesale structure. That's really important, because what that means is I don't compete with my customers. I avoid competing with them in every possible way. And that means that the better they operate, the better I look. My interests are aligned with theirs. I don't need to hide what the network does. The more I enable them, the more I give them tools and insight into the network, the more I deliver more coverage, the more they can drive through their channels, and the better the end user experience is. And we win when the end user is delighted, right? It's that simple. We are a greedy telco. We're owned by private equity companies. But the great thing is my interests are lined up with the end user's interests. When they're happy, I make more money. And that's really important. Because as we said, in the next 4 years, we're trying to spend £4 billion, at least 8 million homes, and connect 30% of the UK. That's important. It's really important, because the UK is lagging behind in this space, and it can't afford to do that, basically. So how are we doing? We're doing great. We're on track to do all these 8 million prims by 2025. Maybe not, maybe 7.9. We'll get close. When I joined about 5 years ago, we had slightly more than 100 people. We hired more than 100 people last month into the business. That 1,400 number is wrong now. I think we're close to 1,500. We have 44 locations in build. We've handed out contracts to a value of 2.5 billion. We have live services in 31 locations. And as I've said, we've got 285 locations where we're planning to build. We've listed those out. We've stated our ambition. We planted our flag and said, this is where we're going to change the world. We brought on board a series of fantastic partners, Bechtel, the Fibre Nation guys, Vodafone TalkTalk, Zen, a business that is so focused on customer service that they just won the Which Best Customer Service in an ISP award. They're trusting their customer service metrics to our network. That's super important. That's a great vote of confidence for us. But it's not just that we're helping ourselves, right? We're structurally changing the industry. I'll talk a little bit later in this about how we actually build, the details of what we do and how we dig, the options in terms of overhead and so forth. But it's really, really important to understand that before you can build, you have to build a machine to build. Part of that machine is 10,000 jobs that we're creating in the construction industry. We're prioritizing local jobs with people. We find that not only is it great when you're in Coventry or Wolverhampton or Milton Keynes to hire local people, because that's where we live. Those are part of our offering, but they really understand the local issues. And that can come down to something as simple as you probably shouldn't build at this time because that's when that road is full of the morning traffic rush. Not so much anymore, but that really helps. It helps that we kind of bring local people in terms of our interactions with the councils. It helps that we take an actual, focus on the cities we're into. We care about those communities. We care about changing them. The slogans that we have about transformation are not empty. I mean, they're easy to say, they're easy to write, but we actually mean them because we engage with the local cities that we're in. Not just hiring local people, not just speaking to the councillors and making sure everything's good, but trying to actually see a massive difference. And this can get very personal. I can't tell you how many times I've met somebody who's using the network, whose life has been changed by simply making the bandwidth available on a consistent basis. People who, one woman who every Friday used to take a train into London to use her sister's broadband to upload her work for the week, now could stay at home and was home when her kids got back on a Friday. A simple human change like that. That's what these networks enable. But it's not just on the construction side that we're making sure that everything's working. We're also transforming the structure of the retail side of the process. So as you said, we've got three really great ISPs. We've got Vodafone, who was with us from the beginning, really experienced in this process now, understand it, really committed. TalkTalk, that's starting up that amazing kind of machine that's moving forward. They've turned live on a few cities, and they're just going to keep going, turning more and more of those on, and driving the great value products that we know out of them. And Zen delivering kind of incredible 40, a gigabit for £40. It's really, that kind of value, and from a entity that's known for its network quality and its customer service. But at the same time, I'm really proud of the fact that we've got a whole series of new ISPs, 17 now signed, who are focusing on regional bits of the UK. Probably my favorite from a branding point of view is the HyNet, based in Scotland, with their broadband product. Really lovely branding there. But just a whole series of customers, some entirely new to the space, founded specifically to deliver these services. Some who were business customers of ours, and decided that now, for the first time, they could enter this market because it was differentiated. The products they were getting were good enough to help them do something different. And then other ISPs, who've been operating for a period of time and understood this was going to be how the UK connected things. And now they had a chance to jump in here. My favorite stat around this is that, in New Zealand, the largest ISP didn't exist 5 years ago. It was created specifically to take advantage of the rollout of fibre to the home, and it just crushed the market share process. I love Vodafone, I love TalkTalk, I love Zen. Those guys are doing God's work. But it's also really important for the UK that we start to grow more ISPs, more people in this space, and give more choice to end users, so that they can choose things. We're continuing to expand the network. There's a little URL you'll see on the, you can't see my hand, on the bottom left there. You can go in there and explore the map of where we're going to roll out. If you're like everybody who mailed me in the last 2 weeks, you'll immediately go to your house and then email me to say, why aren't you coming to X town? I really want your service. Every time we announce a network expansion, the reaction is both, that's great, and why aren't you coming to here? We're going to get there, I promise you. We're going to hit as many places as we possibly can. But what we are doing now, and starting to kind of stretch the definition of city and Cityfibre a bit, is we're starting to expand out from the cities themselves into little regional areas around pockets of connectivity that we think are underserved, and leveraging all that city-based infrastructure to drive everything forward. So you can see Glasgow there, a city we've committed to, and around it, a whole series of islands of connectivity that we're going to enable. We'll do more around Glasgow, I've no doubt, at some point. But for the moment, these 8 million homes, a third of the UK again, are our playground, and we're going to deliver services into them. And as I said, we're doing that by building a machine. So the first thing we do in our thinking is we select where we're going to go. We've done that, published the list, job done. We sit down and design that process, that well-planned city design. I'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment, but in homage to my long-suffering woodwork teacher from high school, we're a design twice, build once company, right? The work you do up front is important in understanding how you end in this process. We hand that over to our build machine. Bechtel is helping us build that process, but it's those 1,400 employees internally that are driving 10,000 contractors out there. to drive and build these networks. And at the end of that all, we connect you. That's the only reason we exist, is to make sure that end users are plugged into the network and deliver what we do, deliver services. Because once you're connected, that full fiber is the key to unleashing our economic potential in a digital age. These words have been said by network people for the last 15 years. Fiber, digital, everything's going to be software. I've given endless speeches talking about how HD television is going to consume bandwidth. Well, last April, everyone in the UK went out and bought a 65-inch 4K television. And that in a month, that all became true. Without the fiber network that we're building, that change does not happen, right? These stats are a little old, so I'm allowed to cheat somewhat there, but the graph as a structure is essentially correct. The UK lags behind everybody, most embarrassingly lagging behind France. France is 25% of their houses are connected to full fiber already. We're in single digits. Now, if you look at COVID vaccination results, those two numbers are swapped around. So we're winning there, and that's great. But what we really need to be doing is driving the connectivity for our own end users. And we're doing that through this process. Excuse me for a moment. Can't be left behind through this process, right? We have to build a network. We have to join the modern world. We know that data is increasing. We based our network build off something called the Cisco VNI, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And it said network traffic is growing 26% compound every year. And we're seeing that specifically on the network, right? We're tracking that number almost exactly as the traffic grows. We saw what happened when COVID hit. That changed things certainly, but as a structural change, that curve that you see there is real and is happening. And that tells you all you need to know about how long the copper network is going to last. You cannot wait for anything to change for 24% a year and expect to deliver great services. The future, we used to talk about all the stuff, as I said, HD, what was 4K going to do to things. I now own 2 VR headsets. I own 2 4K televisions in the house. I have countless tablets in the house. We've lived on Netflix. My daughter's lived on Roblox. The future is here. The future consuming this bandwidth is here today. And we need to make sure it works well in our homes. But it's not just, as I said before, it's not just about that bandwidth connectivity. The UK as a tech investment destination is the most important one in Europe. Since 2015, $37 billion in VC investment has poured into the UK. UK has produced $29 billion companies, VC-backed unicorns, more than anyone else. Germany's next with slightly more than 10. So we're by far and away ahead of everybody else. More than $10 billion invested in deep tech, and 850,000 professional developers make their home on this continent, right? It's not just a home story, it's a story about how we interact with the world. Fiber is critical for that. It's critical for when you're trying to get your groceries delivered. It's critical in terms of how we live, but it's also critical for the services economy that we all exist in. The UK is now a services economy, right? Putting aside the ship they refloated in the last few days, blocking global trade, putting aside the issues at Folkestone with the process with Europe, our future is in services. Services run on the internet, and the internet runs on fiber. That's just how things work, right? Full fiber is the key to unlocking fundamentally the change in the country. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here in terms of what we're delivering, but this is literally the foundation of our future, of the country's future. As I said, the Fibre to the Home Council did a study which estimated that full fiber could add 1 to 2% of GDP growth, right? It's not just increased productivity, but now with work from home, work from anywhere, it's more important than ever that we have talent retention, that we have an agile workforce, right? High employment is going to be critical in the next few years. And added to all of that, we need to solve the problem of connecting everybody and making sure that it's an inclusive network that helps everybody. Fiber is the way you do that, right? Jeff Bezos has a wonderful approach to things. He says there are some questions which allow you to understand the future perfectly. And some of those questions for him are, has anybody ever said, my delivery turned up too quickly? Has anybody ever said, I didn't like it, it was too cheap, it didn't cost enough? I said, no. You can build a business off the fact that you know what the answers to those questions are going to be. We're doing the same thing. We know that nobody has ever said, this fiber is too reliable. We know that nobody has ever said, I just don't want all this bandwidth, it's too much, right? Reliable, high bandwidth, and driving growth is something that is just going to happen. We know this is the future. It's not a complex strategic question. It makes my job really easy. I have other parts of my job that are really difficult, so don't tell my boss how easy things are. What does that mean specifically? It means in the 100 towns and cities that we're trying to connect, over the next 15 years, we'll add about 43 billion pounds. For every pound we put in the ground, the country will take back 10. That's a great deal. I'm doing this with private money, and I'm delivering massive benefits, right? 7 billion pounds to private households, over $1 billion in healthcare benefits. A big chunk of that is 5G innovation, 28 billion pounds, but also 10 billion to industry, how IET is going to change that structure, 5 billion worth of economic impact to cities. That means fewer traffic jams, it means cleaner air, it means stuff that we all need to grow. So we're running pretty close to sort of where we need to think about wrapping this up a bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we actually build the process. I mentioned earlier the well-planned city methodology. What does that mean? It means that when we think about the city, the place we're going to build, we think about every single application, everything, homes, mobile, business, the public sector, smart cities, literally smart connected benches. I've had someone make a pitch to me to say there's a park bench which is connected to the internet using fiber. Most of it was around charging your mobile phone and a few other things, but there was an actual application there that made some sense. Then we take that design and we say, what do I need to build now? And we build that. But we know that when the demand comes for, please connect all of the traffic lights, please connect all the CCTV locations, please connect these 50 small cells. We already know what the network needs to do to expand to do that. Most of it's already there. We take a short step forward to create that solution. Every metro network we built was designed for rapid whole city full fiber expansion. If you look at Milton Keynes, a much derided city, but now one of the most connected cities in the UK. This was our network up there in green a few years back. We've just flooded the place with fiber. If you're in Milton Keynes, it's a bit like McDonald's, you're never more than 5 minutes away from one. In terms of that, you're never more than a few meters away from our network now. Anything you want to connect in Milton Keynes, we can connect. How do we do that? How do we take a network that we started in late 2018, now looks like that, 80 or 90,000 homes kind of connected across that process? What do we actually do to build that? When we started out, we mostly kind of built all that infrastructure ourselves. We dug, we hired a bunch of people with spades, we dug trenches, we put plastic into them and glass into that. But over time, we've evolved to use more and more of the infrastructure from OpenReach. We still don't think the PIA process is, perfect or fit for purpose, but we've managed to make it work so that we now have a fully hybrid approach to building. And that means that one, we're delivering both underground and overhead over OpenReach and our own poles. But underground, we're using their ducts, we're using our ducts in a harmonious symphony of delivery. That means that we build faster. It means less disruption. People don't like you digging up their streets. COVID was great for this because people were not driving around, but now that people are coming back out, we're going to need to avoid, closing streets as much as possible. And it means lower carbon. Lower carbon is a bit of a tick box in many cases, but we're actually driving a lower carbon future out of this process, not just from digging, but just in terms of the way we run the network. That hybrid architecture looks a bit like this. We build something called a fiber exchange. So we've looked at the exchanges that are out there now. They're lovely 60s and 70s buildings, and they're massively too big. So we've built something that's a fiber exchange focused purely on fiber. And from that, we build out a series of rings that connect primary nodes that create the core infrastructure. Now we build all of that ourselves. The PIA ducts are nowhere near big enough to take the amount of fiber that we need in those core rings for resilience, for the delivery of dark fiber and so forth. But from there, we go underground, we go overhead, and we distribute the network out to the end user's premise. And that means we RFS your house, and we have a very specific meaning for ready for service. We think ready for service means ready for service. It means that there's a piece of fiber on a pole right next to your house, or there's a piece of fiber in a Toby box directly outside your house. It means that if you place an order, we expect that we can deliver that within a few days. By a few, I mean within 5 at worst. You can order up to 6 months in advance if you want, because broadband contracts are terrible and you're trapped in them. But if you call us on a Monday, we can deliver it by the next Monday, including digging, including connecting overhead, the whole thing. This is just some of the stuff that we do. Our primary nodes are buried. We have secondary nodes in little cabinets. We have secondary nodes on poles. And we deliver to a little plastic box with a Cityfibre logo on the outside of your house, so people know that you're connected to the best network in the country. Now, I've heard that in Ipswich and in the surrounds, there's some networking people. Apparently BT has an office up there or something. And a lot of them will be saying, this looks very familiar, right? You've got some chambers, you've got overhead poles, you've got some stuff you've dug in the ground. This is all great. And they're right in a very kind of narrow sense, right? What we've discovered over the past year or two is that anybody with a bit of focus can build 1,000 homes of FTDP. It's really not very difficult. What is difficult is what we need to do, which is build 1,000 homes of FTDP every hour. That's the rate that we get to when in a few years, around 2023. We're pouring homes out at a rate of knots. The difficulty is not how do I build that underground chamber? How do I get the cabinet in place? It's how do I do that 10,000 times exactly the same with perfect quality, perfect records, and make sure that when the customer calls up, everything's in the right place to deliver. That's what we're doing. We're building a machine for delivery. If you ask us what's our differentiating factor in terms of the network, sure, there are any number of fantastic innovations that we've made in specific parts of the network, but the big innovation is we built a machine to build a network. We have done some stuff that we're really proud of. One, we got narrow trenching to work. Back when I was with a large incumbent ISP in the UK, this was the issue with this stuff was always how do you reinstate it? How do you do this in a way that makes some sense? But we've really managed to get this to work at volume. It means that it's really rapid. It's minimal disruption to residents. If we're going down your street, you'll see us digging as you leave in the morning. When you come back, we're usually cleaning up and reinstating and sorting some stuff out that same day, not multi-day builds. It's also really great for the environment. We do less work, we have less waste. It's really fantastic. And it's non-disruptive. That's a Apple phone. It's not embedded in the pavement over there. It's just there to give you some sense of scale. But there's a set of local people we've employed to drive that minimal disruption to the process. And then at the end of the day, we connect the customers. So that's a Vodafone router up there. And if you peek in the bottom right, you'll see a number that we're really proud of. 907 megabits of downstream connectivity. You never quite get a gig. There's some overheads, and often the speed test servers are a bit odd, but we get pretty disappointed if that starts dipping close to 900, and typically that's much more like 950 or 960. And what's not shown there is the upstream, symmetric 900 megabits upstream at the same time. We love the way that this end user process works. Again, we've got a machine that does it. And when you order, we'll complete the whole thing in 5 days. And we ask people at the end of that process, are you happy with what just happened? And about 90% of them say, I'm very happy, right? We have NPS scores that are slightly below Apple's in terms of end user customers. Part of that is a lot of them are on terrible broadband, and we turn up and give them what's in essence a miracle. But the other part of it is that it's possible to install something in a kind of humane way, and turn up on time, interact with people properly, and kind of explain to the ISPs when people are going to be there and give them a lot of information about what's going on, and really deliver a service when you're doing this process instead of just kind of churning it through a series of numbers. Before we jump into questions, I'm aware that we're running kind of late on time. I wanted to talk a little bit about what our fiber exchanges are. We're really, really proud of these. Like Amazon, we deliver them from a location in Ireland. They look like this. Sometimes they're out in especially little compounds. Sometimes they're inside a warehouse, but they're fundamentally delivered on the back of a truck. And that building there serves 50 to 100,000 locations within a town. If any of you are familiar with some of the larger BT exchanges, that's on the order of significant exchanges within London, Chelsea, or something like that. They are super power efficient. They're highly resilient. We have lots and lots of power. There's never a question about, oh, I'm running out of power in order to run kind of some of the equipment. They're run remotely, and we're going to end up with somewhere around 150 or 160 of these, depending on the exact designs across the country. Not only do we kind of run our network out of them, and these are running great, but we make them available as edge network servers to enable 5G, kind of, that 4K VR, the streaming video services, the streaming gaming services, all that 5G edge compute stuff is going to happen in these locations. This is one thing we really do differently, and we're really super proud of. So that's us. What are we doing? We're delivering world-class networks for the digital age, and digital age is here now. And we're really, really super excited to be able to be doing this with the UK. So with that, I think we'll end the slideshow and move on to any questions that people have.
Clayton, that was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much. You covered an awful lot there, and I can see there are quite a few questions. So I think we will cut straight over to Q&A, and I'll hand over to my colleague George to put the questions to you.
Okay, Clayton, thanks very much. Question from Ian. And Ian says, technology and offer is great, but I've watched Cityfibre digging up the streets around my home in Ipswich for the past few months, but it seems very difficult to find out when service will be available and how to get it. Why don't you communicate better, advertise on the hoardings that surround the diggings or your vans?
What a great question. I desperately want your service. Please help me buy it. We're starting to do exactly that, Ian. I know that we could do better about explaining exactly when things are going to be turned on. And in some cases, we've had to wait for the ISPs to catch up to the network build. So we built Ipswich in advance of when the ISPs were available. But we have started advertising on the hoardings. We've now started to put trucks that drive around the cities and show exactly what's going on. And we're going to be much, much more transparent about this. The other thing you can do if you really want to know what's going on is jump onto the website and pre-register. And you'll get updates as the network rolls out and as the availability happens, and we'll make sure that you know what's happening. But we'd love to give you a service, Ian. If you get hold of me separately to this, we'll make sure you understand when it's going to be available to you.
Okay, thank you. Question from Salah. How would you power up the customer premises equipment during a power outage due to force majeure to maintain telephone access? Oh, it's just moved for me, to emergency service as required by regulated universal service telephony. And I'm going to say a supplement to this one. If you use battery backup, who will pay for battery maintenance and replacement? Customer or network provider operator?
Well, so this is no longer a requirement from a regulated service point of view. We don't provide battery backup. If the power goes out for some reason, then yes, the service does go out. We're aware that there are some vulnerable users who need help. We're working with the ISPs, because remember, I don't own those customers. My ISPs do, and they need to deliver service. But we're working with the ISPs to understand how they'd support vulnerable customers in these various locations. But right now, your phone would turn off, Sarah. I think Ofcom's view on most of this is it's almost certain you've got a mobile phone with you in that case.
Okay, another question from Salah, but it sounds like a short one. Do you have plans to exploit the more than 30,000 gigahertz of optical fiber spectrum, or are you going to restrict to 1 gigabits? Oh
no, we're fully aware that this network needs to grow with time. We're looking at the 10 gig stuff right now. I fully expect that I'll have left, but at some point we'll run 100 gigs over the network. The network is, as I said, it's designed to run for 50 to 100 years. The glass stays in place. The electronics at the end will definitely change. So we're delivering a gig now because that makes sense. It's a lot faster than people are used to, and for the most part, everything fits into that. But we will explicitly drive towards 10 gig fairly aggressively. And at some point in the near future, we'll make that available to consumers, not just businesses. I'm unsure of the demand for that, but what I've learned through this process and through my many years is if you say something like, people don't need that much bandwidth, you're inevitably wrong. So people who need 10 gigs at home will get 10 gigs at home. And as the electronics kind of line up later, we'll make sure more of that capacity is available to them.
Thank you. Question from Kevin Fields. All these services cost money. How are you going to remain cost competitive with the competition?
Well, partly that's because we built the network to run itself, right? So once we spend a lot of money up front to build, and we spend a lot of money to connect people, but after that, the network is largely self-serving. So long term, this is a very, very cheap network to run. Margins are fantastic for infrastructure companies once you've deployed the capital. The other answer to this, though, is without giving away too much pricing, I'm already significantly cheaper than the other people you can buy layer 2 broadband access services from, where my ISPs have a structural advantage in the market based on my pricing. We remain competitive because, however great my network is, I've got to compete for the customer, and part of that competition is price. And you'll see that in kind of the pricing that's coming out from people like Zen and others. Increasingly gigabit services are entry-level services now. We have 100 meg services on our network through Vodafone, for example, for £22 a month as an end user price. So I think we're very cost competitive.
Thank you, Clayton. Charles from Charles Sperry. Charles can readily see the benefits that modern fibre-based network can bring, and he can see how the economics work within a high-density city. But how can we bring the same benefits to those of us living and working in remoter rural communities?
So this is a multifaceted answer. Some places are simply too expensive for a commercial operator to go to, and the government's really helping out there. So BDUK is looking at how they can connect 5 million homes that are really pretty rural with some subsidies, and we're having a set of conversations with how we can help with a big chunk of that. But we're also finding, as we get more efficient at building, that we can build further out. So you'll see if you jump onto our website, look at the newly announced locations. They're not necessarily big cities. They're conurbations. They're small blobs in and around the cities where we can reach optically, and we're going to continue to breathe in, expand our network out, and help people who are on further out to that process. So I think it's a combination of kind of government intervention, which is happening already really well, plus people becoming more efficient in building further out. you'll definitely end up with something, Charles, in the next few years. I know it's tough to wait, but it's coming.
There's a couple of fairly commercial questions from Salah, so I'm going to step over these for a minute, and you can give me an indication as to whether you think you can deal with these. But I'm going to move on to a question from Jeremy Steventon Barnes now.
Hey, Jeremy.
Jeremy says, Clayton, I won't encourage you to go into full Greg mode, but given that there may be a few OpenReach BT people in the audience, what should BT Group have done differently 10 plus years ago that would have foreclosed the market opportunity for Cityfibre? And I won't ask the writer on that question, but you can read it and deal with it if you think that that's appropriate.
Well, I think we were having a discussion earlier because many of us are ex-OpenReach people. How do you succeed Steve Robertson? That's a really tough question. I'm not sure that there's anybody who could really have stepped into those shoes. Look, the answer is simple, right? They could have had the vision and built the fiber network. They've spent the last decade building fiber to the cab networks, messing around with G.fast. In 2018, there was still a plan for 10 million G.fast nodes. It was clear that the future was fiber. All they had to do to stop us was build the fiber network, and they failed to do that. And the lesson from Europe is that when you do that, things go badly for you. Telia is no longer the incumbent in Sweden. It's sort of the third largest network there now, and buying access from the fiber companies that built over them. That's all they had to do was build. They already spent the money. They could have solved this problem quite some time ago. Look, OpenReach is it's 30,000 people. They're a machine in their own way. They'll solve a lot of these problems. But it was the lack of competition fundamentally that allowed them to ignore the problem. We've created that competition. OpenReach have responded. They've responded really well. And we expect that there'll be many places where we end up competing. We expect to win those competitions. We expect OpenReach to win some of that stuff. But fundamentally, it was lack of competition to do the obvious correct thing.
Okay, moving on. I'll ask you, do you want to answer these questions from Salah about your connection costs and operation costs and so on?
Well, I'll give some general kind of numbers. We've always said that, we aim to pass homes for less than £500 or so. Our connection costs are less than what OpenReach is talking about in the press, mostly because we build a network right out to the home. So all we have to do is a few hours work on the day. Even if you're digging some, it's not that expensive, and we're really, really comfortable with the economics of what we're doing. Our investors have found more and more billions of pounds to pour in. They're super happy with the economics. It works where we're building. It works in the expansion areas, and we're achieving better and better cost efficiencies as we build more. So, yeah, we're super happy with the numbers.
Okay. Question from Graham Price. Cityfibre's network passes my property, but the service is not available from ISPs, presumably because the development is flats, approximately 200 units across a number of 3-story buildings. Do Cityfibre have a strategy to provide service to multi-dwelling units, which must represent a significant chunk of properties in many cities?
Yeah, it's a really good observation, Graham. Absolutely, we do multi-dwelling units. We have a team dedicated to delivering stuff there. The big issue with the MDUs is just getting access to them from the landlords fundamentally. What we'd like to do is come up to the outside of the building and then fill in the network on the inside. So we go up to all the floors so that when someone orders a service, it's a very simple installation from the risers across to their apartment. But you need the landlord's permission to do that in advance. There's a set of way leaves, and that's a complex process. So I can't comment specifically on your flats because I don't know where you live. But in many cases, what's happened is we're negotiating with the landlord to allow us in to kind of complete that process. But we definitely deliver services to MDUs. We have a dedicated team that thinks about that. And we have a really neat and efficient solution to do that when we push the service in.
Thank you. Question from Stuart. My village is on the latest Cityfibre list. We have reasonable fibre to cabinet at the moment, but live at the end of a close up a shared private driveway. How will we get fibre to premise to this location?
Okay, it's almost the same answer, Stuart. We run into this quite a bit. We'll build to essentially the public curtilage on the outside. And if you order service, we'll have a conversation essentially with everybody who shares that driveway. We need everyone's permission to kind of dig up the driveway and connect the homes. And if we get that, we'll deliver service to you. But it is up to the people who own the driveway to agree that we can do that. We think that certainly some of those way leaves should be easier to do, and we've asked the government to help. It's one of the blockers. But as long as you're not arguing with your neighbours and they're being reasonable, we'll be able to deliver service to you.
Thank you. Question from Salah about take up of fibre to the home offering to residential customers. Where are you in that journey?
Unsurprisingly, this is not a number that we share. But what I will say is, we're right on plan. Different cities are moving around in various different places, but we're slightly ahead of where we expected to be at this point in terms of connectivity. And we are confident this will deliver the overall connectivity that we need. Yeah, it's going good. People love the service.
Question from Chris Tapp, who's applauding the scale of investment and that you are providing symmetric services. He notes his frustration about asymmetric service, and he's noting the requirements for cloud services needing higher upload speeds than were needed in the past. Do you have any plans to deploy into rural, semi-rural areas that are seriously restricted both in bandwidth and choice?
Yeah, definitely. So as I said earlier, we're working partly with the government on the BDUK piece, and we hope to deliver a few million locations through that process. But along the way, we're also passing a lot of areas where there's bad connectivity, and we'll take the opportunity to grow the network as fast as we can. You'll notice our language is very, very specific and also very general in that we talk about 30% or more of the UK. We're going to build everywhere we can until it stops making sense. A lot of the areas you're talking about, the rural, semi-rural areas, where people have terrible service, have a lot of demand and are quite attracted to us. So over time, you'll see us expand more and more out into there. And I agree with you, Chris. It's, upstream is now just as important as downstream. The number of people, you can see this now fundamentally. As you jump on the video calls, you can tell which network people are on by the quality of the video that they're showing. And you can tell which ones drop in and out. And it's all about upstream. It is, I think, upstream is now a fundamental part of the service, and everybody's going to have to move to doing that.
Thank you. Question from David and Jackie Kronheim. How do you integrate with OpenReach and other providers?
We don't, is the answer fundamentally. So, I mean, aside from duct and pole access, which we use from OpenReach, we largely use almost no OpenReach infrastructure. We're not in the exchanges. Some of our ISP customers are in those exchanges and we bring traffic to them. But pretty much they run their network, we run ours, and the best network should win.
Question from Dara. Who are your main competitors and what gives you the competitive edge over them?
So there's a whole series of them. OpenReach is an obvious answer, and we're in direct competition with OpenReach. There are also a series of other fiber builders across the country who are trying to do interesting things. Some of those are quite small, some of those are quite large and have had significant investment in them in the past few months. And we view all of those guys as both friends. More fiber into the world is a good thing from our point of view. So we're very supportive of new fiber builders. But they're also competition in a sense, right? We don't avoid them. We don't try and figure out, we don't coordinate builds with any of those people. We'll build to the right places that are correct for us. And others, at some point that means we have to build some of the other competitors. But what's really great is there is a solid ecosystem of this stuff now developing in the UK. There are 2 or 3 players who've had multi-100 million pound investments. There's a whole series of players with between 10 and 100 million who are building things. Some of them will fail, some of them will succeed spectacularly, and it's great. The more of the stuff we have, the better.
Question from Charles Sperry. who notes that if every entity in the country is connected to gigabit rate fibre services, that implies that the equivalent of the inter-exchange region country trunk backbone networks would need to be similarly upgraded, else they become the bottleneck. So who is responsible for that effort, and is that progressing similarly?
So fundamentally not us. We're responsible for connecting a home back to a fiber exchange, or if you want to connect to a BT exchange or a data center, we'll deliver the traffic there. How it moves around the country is really up to each ISP, and they each have their own networks to do that. A lot of those networks are very big. It's fairly typical to have 100 gigabit connections now, and the ISPs have gotten really good at kind of managing traffic over this process. So it's a problem that happens and is solved outside of my sphere of influence, but I'm glad to say that we've got some really great ISPs in the UK, and they're concentrating on making sure that works.
Question from James Sonby. Ofcom Connected Nations shows 35% compound growth, not 26%. I assume that's data volumes. Does this change the growth plans that you would envisage?
So if that continues to hold, and that's true, it's not what we're seeing on the network. We're seeing a number below 35, but it's significant. No, what it does is it brings forward some points at which you have to upgrade the network or split the ponds or change the electronics, but the plan stays the same, right? We're not delivering a service and kind of trying to manage the bandwidth and make sure the end user doesn't use too much. Our goal is to make sure that there is zero restriction on the end user's throughput. That works pretty well today with gigabits. It'll have to be 10 gig soon. That growth rate would mean it happens a few years earlier, and if that's the case, that's great because it means more people are using the network.
Okay, question from Peter Smith, timed at 7:37. So you might not have said some of the things that you did about the technology around the serving nodes. Could you explain the process to connect to homes, please?
Yeah, of course. So if we talk a little bit about a home that's connected on the underground, we'll turn up on the day. We'll agree with the homeowner how to kind of route the fiber through the garden to get to the home and what the best place to go through the wall is. We sign some way leaves, we sign some paperwork with the homeowner so that everyone's happy and we know what we're going to do. And then we dig through the garden through an agreed route. If you want us to avoid the dahlias, we'll do that. And drill a hole through the wall and pop in essentially some fiber guide, some tubing. We blow fiber back from the secondary node all the way through to that location. And we install a small ONT about the size of a pack of cards. I used to say size of a pack of cigarettes, but no one knows what cigarettes are anymore. Connect that to the wall. And then typically we plug in the router. We show you that working. We do some speed tests. We shake your hand, you give us some tea, and we leave in a few hours. Similar process for overhead, except obviously less digging. We just have to install drop wires through the process. And the fiber is typically at the head end, not blown through that process. But yeah, that's what we do. It takes a few hours. We interact with you. We spend as little time as possible inside your home because we know that these days it's best not to kind of be indoors with other people.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about telecom equipment vendors and what sort of optical switching you use. That's from Salah and Paul Brent. Okay,
so at the moment we are all based on a company called Calix out of Silicon Valley, obviously. Calix uses some equipment that is based off the old Ericsson OLT stack, and that's what we have at present. And we have some Nokia kit in terms of kind of the handover switches, etc. We're looking at second vendors and trying to understand how that works. But right now, we're really happy with Calix. They provide some really fantastic SDN capability that we've exploited, and we're continuing to roll out with them. So yeah, that's what we do. There's no, just to Salah's point, there's no problem finding OLT vendors as long as you're staying kind of out of China fundamentally.
Can you say something about optical electronic optical conversion and optical transport networks from Paul Brent? They're short questions, these.
We don't touch the OTN side of things, right? So we deliver layer 2 services, and there's a series of 10 and soon to be 100 gig handover ports that use standardized electronics to do that. which we buy off the shelf fundamentally. So we don't do OTN, we don't do any of that long distance stuff. It's mostly switched at this point. But again, the ISPs deal with a lot of that stuff. My responsibility is to get the traffic to a ENI handover and pass it on to the ISPs.
There's a question about Cityfibre's rating on Trustpilot. Could you, from Paul Brent? I mean, that's mainly a retail type.
I don't know. I can't comment on that. Happy, Paul, if you want to get hold of me, I'll put you in touch with somebody from our side who can discuss that. But I don't follow Trustpilot.
From Salah, what is your role for universal telephony provision on fibre to home?
Well, I think telephony as a concept is being largely abstracted out, right? It's moving away from handsets and phone numbers to identifiers that just connect to things. These days, you may call another mobile phone, but you're also just as likely to kind of jump on a Teams session or have a one-to-one over Zoom. Telephony has already been abstracted. BT has said it's going to shut down its TDM networks going forward. We see a lot of effort to support SIP and kind of move that whole sector into the 21st century. But broadband enables a lot of alternatives. One of those is virtualizing the telephony network over SIP. But an equally valid one is, I don't have a phone number anymore. You call me at my email address and whatever device on that rings.
Question from Richard Marlowe, which we must be getting close to the end of these, unless you're prepared to continue for a bit, Clayton. But from Richard Marlowe, you're providing fibre connectivity for 5G networks. So what is the economic benefit of retrofitting fibre to the home? Why not use wireless for the last mile connection?
Well, this has always been the argument, right? Wireless is going to kind of replace fixed, and it's never happened. Look, we believe 5G and fixed fibre are going to coexist. If you look at how you use stuff these days, when you're out and about, you don't really think about how much bandwidth you're using, but at home you're on your Wi-Fi. And if you're in a fixed location at the office or something else, you're on the Wi-Fi, right? That's where the volume of bandwidth is. I've got some 5G phones that we use and we test. It's great to get 200 or 300 megabits down, but I'm delivering a gigabit, and I'm delivering it for a lot less than a 5G connection would do. Every time somebody does the economics on this, it's just cheaper to do it over fiber. There's more capacity. There's more. The individual connection is paid for once and not operational, and you don't have to share it with people who are quite happy to pay more money to use it on a bus, right? So we just don't think the business case works out efficiently for wireless. And you go to one of the mobile providers and ask them for a gigabit connection over 5G with unlimited data, and see how that compares to some of the packages that we have.
Okay, question from Tim Gigg. Do you see a consolidation of the UK fibre network companies happening?
At some point, that kind of thing is inevitable. There are simply too many at this point. But it hasn't happened yet, and we haven't, everybody's still working really hard to kind of deliver those services. So yeah, there'll be a consolidation. That's the natural flow of the market. But it's completely unclear who's going to be a buyer and who's going to be a seller at this point.
Does the end consumer have the option to have a direct Ethernet link to your ONU? That's from Gordon Shorten.
I assume that is, can the end customer use their own router? We don't restrict that. It's the ISP that does that. So you'd have to have a conversation with the ISP. We pass layer 2 traffic. Sometimes that's a fairly complex structure with lots of class of service bits and pieces in there to support services. But in theory, as long as your ISP agrees, we're neutral.
And again from Gordon, you mentioned SDN access networks. Can you elaborate further on this?
Sure. So the services that we have are all completely software defined, right? Our basic service is a gigabit in both connections, in both directions. And as an ISP, you can then choose to manage that in complicated ways yourself, or you can ask us to manage the services on top of that. Price doesn't change, but that's what we offer. And we're able to do that because all of the services are driven by software fundamentally. The ONT, is a computer at the other end that sits there and says, what should I be doing? How do I manage this voice packet? How do I manage this? And the OLT drives a service description through there. So if you decide to upgrade on our network, that happens in seconds, kind of transparently to us without loss of service and so forth. So we're using SDN fundamentally as a service definition across the whole piece. But what we're trying to do is, virtualize and have a zero-touch interface to everything, so that everything in the network is run through an API.
Okay, I'm leaping forward in some of the questions here. Can we make this one the final? Are you happy with that, Clayton?
Sure.
From Mark O'Brien, do you have an education program which links into colleges? I teach communication engineers for the RAF, and this could be a great learning opportunity for them. If possible, could you give me a point of contact I could approach?
That's a great question. We'd love to help with that. We have a process that helps ex-service people get involved with the process. We love those people because they're smart, they're motivated, they're organized. Why don't you get hold of me and I'll pass you on to the right person. I'm very easy to find, but I'm also clayton.nash@cityfibre.com, and I'll make sure someone speaks to you.
Well, thank you very much for a prodigious effort on the questions there, Clayton. That's 39 answered according to the stats that we're running on this thing. So
I assume that's a record.
Well done. Thank you very much. And I'll pass back to Kevin, our chair.
Okay, thank you, George, and thank you, Clayton. Thank you once again for the presentation. Fantastic, symmetric, future-proof fiber network. So I really look forward to the rollout of the network, and hopefully it gets past the cities into the rural areas as well. So yeah, thank you very much for the material that you've presented in the presentation, and also for taking extensive questions. So very much appreciated. My thanks also to George for grouping the questions and asking the questions on behalf of the audience. That's very much appreciated. And I'd like to remind everyone that we are recording the webinar, and that will be available on our IET Communities website as soon as possible. The URL is displayed on the screen at the moment, and the recording will take a few days to prepare and to check and to upload. So hopefully it will be there within the next 5 to 10 days. I do want to draw your attention to our up and coming webinars in the next few weeks. And we've got a fairly extensive program for this year, but I'll just draw your attention to the next two that we've got. The first one is Cybersecurity Hygiene, Don't Wash Your Hands of It, by Paul Maskell on the 26th of April. And we've got the Eyes of the Few, and that will be about radar development at Bordsey, and Graham Murchie will present that on the 10th of June. So please check out our IET community website for these webinars and details of future ones. So finally, on behalf of the IET Anglian Coastal Local Network, thank you all for joining tonight. And once again, thank you to Clayton and Cityfibre for the presentation and for taking such a lot of questions, pretty much a record question answering session. So thank you, Clayton. And my thanks also to the team from the local network who put the webinar on tonight. So very much appreciated. That concludes the webinar. You may disconnect now. Thank you.